What's going on, everybody? This is Dave from Post Rock Chrome. I'm here with David from Sansyou from Washington, D.C. How's it going, David?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. Really appreciate you coming on. Let's dive right into it. So when and how did you form?
Well, Sansyou had been through a couple iterations, and I guess the start of it was probably 2011, 2012 that the sound started coalesced with different people than are in the band now. But really that started, the idea was to get together two guitars with no bass, no vocals, and very light percussion, almost very limited hand percussion, consciously avoiding a traditional rock and roll drum kit. And that got us started using acoustic instruments too, using strings, using cello. And that led to then a period of time where that sound was explored. And I think we took it as far as we could and switched to electric. And that developed probably more into the post-rock shoegaze sound. And before you know it, there were traditional drums showing up. So that kind of went its course as well. And I think I've got it back now with the newest release, headed back to that very sparse, almost ambient approach to music where I'm doing all the guitars, but I've also introduced keyboards, which is something we flirted with in the past, extremely minimal, but now it's really forward in the sound. And that same limitation on drums is back. So you've got, I think, almost a coming of full circle to where the sound has started, evolved, and come back into. And I'm excited about it. There's lots of new music on the horizon. So I'm excited to keep pushing on this direction.
That's awesome. So you released Eyes Front in April. How's the response been?
Great. I mean, got a lot of great reviews, and I'm appreciative of the response and the community that you put forward here, with generating enthusiasm for the post-rock instrumental sound. There has been, a good response to it. Of course, we're all releasing independent music now without the benefit of doing live shows extensively for how much longer the pandemic will last and what the effect is going to be. We were just chatting about that before we officially launched this conversation, but who knows what the future is of live music for smaller independent artists. I just don't know. And that would be another test to answer your question of how's the response been. It's I did a live stream with it, for the extent that reaches new people and perform the music against a backing track. Made it a guitar loop, played against that. So there was a performance, so to speak, but it's a different kind of world that we're in. So I'm adapting to it. The reviews have been great. I put it out on cassette and I don't have any more cassettes. I don't know where they all went. So somehow there's still enthusiasm for tape. Which I love too. I think it's a fun retro vibe, and they sound better than they ever did. So the cassettes sold, the CDs have sold. I did the hand cut lathe 7-inch for the Eyes Front and a remix on the backside. I'm not here to move mountains of product, but I'm happy to send it out, in multiple trips to the post office throughout the world. That has been fun throughout the pandemic, is masking up and making trips to the post office. So I've been pleased with the response given where we're at in terms of a pandemic.
That's really cool. So who did you record it with and how was the process?
This was different. Again, trying to find a way to work in the middle of quarantines. This is going back now. The session really was planned out last year. It came out April, so really November, December. And think about where we were in the pandemic. People were still definitely masking up everywhere. Social distance, all that was a factor in the studio. But by the time December rolled around, I really wanted to get something together. So there was a lot of file trading in front of the actual recording. There was, call it research and development, and thinking about the songs, but leaving room so that we could experiment once we got to the studio. John Mark King, who did the drums and the keyboards and also mixed it, met with me for the first time in December and said, okay, I know what I want to do in the songs. Let's get your guitar parts down. And that was the focus. So everything else after getting guitar to tape could happen later, that it could happen remotely. And maybe this is one of the positives of the pandemic, is that it's forced people like me to learn how to interact and write music and share music, develop it remotely. And the record came out in the middle of, I think we're in a better state than we are with the pandemic than we were a couple months ago. But it didn't stop the development of the songs, the recording, and pressing the record, getting the discs out. That all proceeded. And I thought plenty of times, like, maybe this is just not going to happen. There's a lot of things that can go wrong here, none of which are in my span of control. But it proceeded, and I was glad to get it out despite or in spite of the pandemic.
Very cool. So you're from Washington, D.C. How's the post-rock, shoegaze, dream pop scene there?
I'm actually, I've been here for almost 30 years, but originally from southeastern PA. So I grew up in Hershey, and closer to your part of the world, right? The scene here has a couple different bands that wax and wane, Cocteau Twins quote, wax in terms of activity. There's some great bands that I've had the chance to be on bills with when we were doing active shows. Some of the bands like Tone is one that's been around for a long time, and they'll bring a band like Russian Circles into the fold. They'll a bill that can pull together instrumental music. It tends to be heavier, more aggressive than what Sansyou is doing now. But those were ways that we could play with other bands and learn about different sounds and expose our music to people who like the dark and the heavy and the lighter shades that come in with it. We mentioned a couple bands before this started about, I think, Explosions in the Sky, Mogwai, bands that will easily, traverse that spectrum of, heavy, dark, light, ethereal, ambient, all in one song, and do it all multiple times in one record. And I think that's great. So there are some bands here that will do that have that capability. You have to look for them, in my experience. You have to hunt, because DC still carries that reputation of being hardcore centric, right? And Fugazi still casts a long shadow, and the sound and the record labels that support that are still here, and tend to dominate. So instrumental music, things that Sansyou is doing, has always been on the periphery. It'll always stay on the edges and operate in the margins. But we find an audience. People like what we do enough to support it. And I'm fine if it's never center stage. That's all right. Maybe instrumental music always does belong on the margins. Okay with me. But DC has a reputation for being about something else. And that something else tends to be gritty, grindy, acerbic hardcore, which to me a little goes a long way.
So who are your biggest influences?
Well, certainly we talked about a bunch of these bands already. They're in the mix for sure. I'm a big fan of the guitar work of Sam Prekop and Archer Pruitt from The Sea and Cake. That's a huge influence on me. I love that band. I've seen them a bunch. I don't know if it ever shows up in my playing because they're so skillful, and I still feel like a beginner in many ways. So they're part of it. On the heavy side, and I don't think this shows up per se, I love Killing Joke, one of the post-punk, godfathers, and they're still going strong. They have fantastic music that they keep releasing. But I really enjoy what they do in the ability to build drama within one song, to go from quiet to loud and back down again, tension and release. That's built into their music, and I that much I'll try to incorporate some of those ideas. So maybe not a likely influence, but conceptually, I think it's there. So they're a big deal for me. And of course, Cocteau Twins, Robin Guthrie. You can't get around the influence that he has. A big fan, certainly, of what he does, and continues to put out new music too on his own, which is exciting.
That's awesome. So if you could tour with one of those bands, which one?
Oh boy, that would be tough. If I could tour with anyone, huh? Who would be the least likely to beat me up? Because I think my stuff would be so soft and so light of a touch. It would probably have to be, I would say, the Sea and Cake might be the most tolerant of having whisper soft music, because they do some of it, but they can pump it up too. But I'd probably have the best chance of making a connection with them.
Very cool. So now I'm going to ask you some non-music questions. It's a good way for me to get to know you. I did this with the other bands I interviewed. Are you ready?
Hit me.
All right, first one, favorite food?
Sushi.
Good choice.
My wife is Japanese, so I get exposed to quite a bit of the good stuff.
I'm jealous. Best vacation that you've been on?
Back when we were traveling, right? Well, I like the tropics. I like white sand and blue water and tropical fish you can see with just snorkeling around the surface. So I think it has to be Hawaii.
Did you surf there?
You can surf. I don't surf. I tried once, failed miserably, but survived by the skin of my teeth. So it's a fun place. I recommend it.
Sounds like me. So if you had $1 million and you could donate it to any charity, which one?
Let's see, $1 million. Well, I guess I'd try to recognize what I've learned, what I've observed over the years. We talk a lot about climate change here in DC, and we talk about how vast the problem is, and it is. I guess I would look at something like the National Wildlife Federation, or the Natural Resources Defense Council is a group here in DC that does a lot of good work legal work representing landowners that are trying to protect large swaths of open land from development, and actually trying to help be part of the solution in bringing ecosystem services back into the equation so that the land can actually help protect us. Why do we have giant, colossal floods and catastrophic results? Well, we don't have mangrove forests anymore around Louisiana, do we? We don't have coral reefs that can break the water that comes with such force anymore, do we? If we could restore these ecosystems, we might have a chance of not being destroyed by ourselves. And these organizations that I mentioned do some of that work. There's others. But I guess I would put money into owning the land so that it wouldn't be redeveloped and it could be preserved, it could be protected. It wouldn't buy you much, but it'd be something.
So if you could be fluent in another language, what language?
Japanese. I love it, the culture. I love the history is interesting to me. I've been there twice with my wife, and it's fascinating. And it's a mysterious place to me. But it's a fun mystery. It's an interesting one. And having doors open through language would help a lot. So Japan, if somebody could powderize Japanese and pour it into my brain, and it could speak it tomorrow, that would be just great. And write it too. That's just a separate question.
That would be really cool. That's on my bucket list to go to Japan.
I recommend that too.
They have an awesome alternative music scene.
Yep, they do. There's a lot of great bands out of there. some active, some some not no longer. But yeah, there's a lot to learn from what they're doing.
So if you go back in time and talk to one world leader or person of influence, who would it be?
Outside of music, anything?
It can be outside of music.
Yeah, I guess that is predominant on my mind these days. Maybe it's part of living in DC, is you have to think about current affairs, right? It's inescapable. Boy, oh boy, that's a tough one. I guess I would try to talk to somebody who I think could make a difference. And I'm not sure who that is. I'm drawing a bit of a blank, but I guess somebody that may have been at the edge of seeing where technology has pushed us, and somebody who was in a different place in history. I guess I'd have to reach back to somebody who's traveled both in the world of current affairs, but also technology too. I guess drawing a blank, but at the risk of coming up completely empty, I would maybe say maybe Steve Jobs. To see, because since his passing, we are in a very different place. And I don't think it's what he intended. Not that I know a ton about what his vision was, but I bet it wasn't this. In terms of the divisiveness and how misinformation spreads like blink of an eye, and how so little is being done to counteract that. I bet he'd have something to say about it. But we'll never know.
Very cool. All right, last question. What are some places in Washington, D.C. that visitors should check out?
Well, if you're in DC, and you're of a mind to see some live music, they are bringing it back to the Black Cat, a place that Sansyou has played and hope to play again. It's changed. The venue is different, but it's historic. I would definitely go there, see what's on the agenda. For more live music, the smaller venues also too that we played at are coming back in bits and pieces, and some have closed. The Velvet Lounge has closed. The list of things that have bit the dust is pretty long. But I think, outside of music, there's some really important stuff to see for free, and that's where you get into the museums, the sculptures, the statuary that's around DC, some of it off the beaten path. One fun thing to do, it doesn't cost a dime, is to go down Massachusetts Avenue and to Connecticut Avenue and just look at the embassies and look at all the different flags, see who you can identify. It's still a fun game to me when I'm running around, taking the dogs out. You see a flag and try to, what country is that? Oh, yeah, Poland. And you realize you're amongst a very international city. So walking around, just getting on foot and seeing how much international presence is here in DC, that's great. And it's easy to access.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, chatting up a little bit. I really appreciate you supporting the In Post Rock promo.
Absolutely. Thanks for everything you're doing, because as I mentioned before, I'm discovering great bands from your work, like Midsummer from Poland, that comes to mind. Bought their stuff. You're introducing new bands all the time to me, and this is part of what makes a curator so important. Is there's so much out there. We're drinking from a fire hose, so someone can curate it and put it into context. That makes all the difference. So thank you for what you do.
Of course. So for the people that are going to watch this later, where can they find you at?
Best place is on their Facebook page. There's Sansyou Music, and sansyoumusic.com at Bandcamp is probably the best place to check it out. You're hearing a beagle discover her squeaky toy in the background. Perfect timing for the interview. So someone wants to go play. But yeah, on Facebook and Instagram, you can find Sansyou music, and Bandcamp primarily will be where all the new music gets posted.
Awesome.
All
I
right.
hope you have a great day, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks very much. Take care.
See ya.